Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. All right. Well, I am here today with Laura and Tom from Massachusetts, and I'm so honored and excited to have them on the show today. Laura has written 5 books, and the book that I was given from Tom, and I'm so grateful for it, is called My Name Is Not Jane Doe, and I love the title of this. And it's Laura's story. On her 26th birthday back in 1989, she was assaulted and left for dead. And it's her journey and story of how she was found. God helped rescue her and the miracles that she has seen in her life. So I'm grateful to have you both on the show, and go ahead and tell us your story.
First off, this is all for His glory, and we're grateful for the opportunity to thank God and praise God, because without Him, Laura definitely wouldn't be alive today.
No.
And that's how she built her relationship with God. When you were a kid, Laura, you went to church with your mom, but you
Yeah.
really didn't have a relationship, did you?
No, I didn't.
What really defined Laura, it was during a prison presentation. And at the end of the presentation, there was an inmate who didn't look like he should be an inmate. He was short, blonde hair, about 20 years old, and he had a pocket Bible. And I said, "So do you read the Bible?" And he said, "Yes, I do every day." And he said, "What I got from your presentation was Genesis 50:20, which is, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what now is being done, the saving of many lives." And that's how Laura's journey was crafted. God put her on a path. Her accident was when she was 26, but Laura, you had your challenges as a youth. What
Yeah.
what went on there in the small town of Chicopee, Mass?
When I was a youth, I was extremely shy. I didn't like myself, which made me shy.
And Laura, being shy, Laura was bullied. So all through her childhood, her adolescence, she was under a lot of pressure. People don't realize that when you're bullied, Laura feared what would happen the next day. She developed insomnia. Her parents even moved to a few different locations, thinking that might help. Things didn't change. And at 16, Laura, what was the decision you made as far as your high school career?
I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I would drop out, which was a big mistake.
So 16 years old, Laura's a high school dropout. And reality hit her in the face. She worked different jobs, but couldn't really move forward in life. Then she got her GED, wanted to go to college. She didn't have the funds. So she decided, if I join the US Army, I can get the GI Bill after completing basic training, and the military would pay for her college education. But things didn't work out too well in the military. After about 5 weeks, what happened, Laura, in basic training?
In basic training, I didn't sleep at all. I had such bad insomnia that I ended up getting sick because I was so tired, and they sent me home.
The insomnia that Laura had from the bullying in childhood lives with her to this day. But basic training, another instance where Laura got knocked down in life, got an honorable discharge, medical discharge, had to come home, and now in her early 20s, again had to decide what her path in life would be. So she worked a couple jobs to save money. She decided, maybe I can afford a 2-year college. And what was your major going to be, Laura?
My major was going to be medical assistant.
And what she found different from college was there wasn't the bullying. People were paying for their education. They weren't fooling around. She was getting good grades. Her first year went by, everything was perfect. The time in basic training gave her a little bit of a backbone, so she was a little more confident with herself. And then at the start of her second year, Laura thought about it. She looked into the horizon to see what her future was going to be. And what did you see, Laura, looking ahead, what life would be after graduation?
I was looking ahead at a job, a car, and
And an apartment.
apartment.
So everything was looking bright for her. She was coming up to her 26th birthday, November 4th, 1989, and her parents bought her two gifts. Do you remember what the two gifts were, Laura?
Yes, I love them. One was a gray suede coat. Other thing was a white leather pocketbook, and I never had suede or leather before.
So as a 26-year-old, Laura's very elated. Her birthday, the way most people are on their birthdays, you feel a little extra special. She had her two gifts, and she lived about 80 miles from Boston. She'd never been in Boston. So she just came up with the maybe not the best choice
Mm,
as a single female to go out to Boston just for the day. She got into Boston, and there were a few things she wanted to do, Laura. Do you remember what those things were when she got to Boston?
yes, I wanted to eat a Boston hot dog. I heard so much about Boston hot dogs.
You want to see the sights
And
too.
see the sights and
And also, being a girl, she wanted to window shop. She couldn't afford the clothes
right. Yeah,
in a large city.
that
So
was a lot of fun.
when she got there, she went on the T, which is a public transportation system in
Mhm.
Boston,
That was a journey all its own. Mhm.
and she was having fun that day. It was an early fall day, November 4th, a little chilly. And then around 12:30 or so, she's walking down a sidewalk, and she smells some food. She looks up, there's a street vendor, and she was going to get a Boston hot dog. And she went up, ordered a hot dog with the works, chips, a diet soda, and right across the street there was a park. So there she went, sat on the park bench. Her mouth was salivating because all the energy she burned off. She couldn't wait for that first bite into the Boston hot dog.
Mhm.
And she slowly unwrapped it. Laura, you took that first bite, and how would you describe it?
It sucked. It was horrible. I was so disappointed.
She she couldn't eat it. And Laura looked around and she saw all these squirrels, and one squirrel actually came up to her. And Laura, being the good Samaritan that she is, she dropped a piece of the hot dog down to the squirrel. And
Mm.
Laura, what did that little fellow do?
That little fellow was so cute. He went up to the food and he sniffed it and walked around it, sniffed it again, and then he bolted. He didn't even want it.
So Laura, then she wanted to get back out and see as much of the city as she could because she was just going to be there for that one day. And she goes, sees some more of the sights, goes in some of the shops, does some window shopping. And then it started to get later. It was about 4 o'clock, 4:30. The sun was starting to set, and the whole atmosphere changed because you were hungry, you're getting a little tired, a little cold. And when the sun set, Laura, and the shadows started being cast across the street, your whole mood changed. Did you start to feel a little bit uneasy?
Very uneasy.
Laura was about 3 blocks from the bus station. So she starts walking towards the bus station. When Laura was in basic training and did a lot of marching, one thing that was ingrained in her was a cadence of footsteps
Mhm.
hitting the pavement. And as Laura was walking down the sidewalk, she heard two sets of footsteps behind her, and something just didn't feel right. They were walking the exact same pace
Mm.
as Laura.
I started to get very frightened.
So Laura started to walk faster. And what do those footsteps do?
And I walked faster and they walked faster.
And obviously, when Laura walked slower, they slowed down. Laura heard a third set of footsteps, but that set of footsteps was completely different. It was very soft. Laura could barely hear it. So now Laura's about 2 blocks from the bus station, and she decides, I'm just going to start walking faster. I'll get to the bus station, and everything's going to be okay. She's a block from the bus station. She could hear the buses pulling in and out. She could see some of the buses. She knew one of those was going to be hers, and all this fear was going to be for nothing. She takes her next step, and she felt a little resistance, and she thought maybe the strap of her purse caught onto something. And then Laura took her next step, and she couldn't move any further. There was a sharp tug on her purse now. And when she felt that sharp tug, it was so sharp, it spun her around. She looked into the eyes of two men, two strangers, who just told her, "You keep your mouth shut or we're going to hurt you."
Mm.
Now, here's Laura as a 26-year-old, but she grew up very shy as a kid. She was so terrified. Her heart was in her throat. She couldn't even scream. And the two men had parked their car on the side, and they timed it where they caught up to Laura right where their car was. So before she knew it, one of them opened the car door, the other one pushed her in. And now on Laura's 26th birthday, she was heading for a disaster. It was very horrific what happened, but Laura will tell people it's not a pity party. She doesn't do that for any sympathy. She does it for one reason, praise God for saving her life, and also for awareness for young women. Always be careful. Laura was just not aware that day. You never think anything will happen to you, but on this day, the worst could happen to Laura.
Right.
They put her in that car, they drove off, they looked for a secluded area, they pulled over. First thing they did, they looked at that white purse, Laura, and what did they say to you?
They said, I hope there's money in here because we need to get a fix tonight.
The two men were heroin addicts. When you're an addict and you're going through withdrawal, you'll do anything to get money.
Right.
And Laura was a soft target, single female with a purse over her shoulder.
It sure was.
They took out her wallet. All she had was $10. Being a college student, she didn't have very much money, and they took her ID. And Laura thought, well, that's not that bad. I can live with that. It's only $10. She thought they would let her go after that, but they didn't. The two men sexually assaulted her after that. So Laura not only lost a little bit of money, she lost her dignity, and now she's incredibly shaken up. And then the next thing, they said, now get out of the vehicle. Laura thought they were going to let her go, but as she got out of the vehicle, one of the men got out with her and held her while the other man was reaching under the front seat for something. He had a bat under the seat, baseball bat. And while Laura was being held, he got out of the car with the bat, came up to Laura, held that bat over her head, and it came crashing down. He hit her several times, every time to her head, and he fractured Laura's skull. And that was the cause of Laura's quadriplegia. It's a head injury, not a spinal injury. And she also suffers cortical blindness. Laura's legally blind because of that. And Laura has a traumatic brain injury. Her short-term memory is greatly hampered. So after all those blows, Laura was completely out. And I think at that point, the two men must have thought they killed her.
Mhm.
She's unconscious. And what they did next, they put Laura back in the car. They drove off that night. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, actually. And this is where we did some little bit of investigating, because a lot of the details Laura really didn't know about it, but there were all these questions in Laura's mind as far as what exactly happened. We found out that night around 2:30 in the morning, there was a car accident at a red light, and the car that caused the accident took off. A person takes off only for a few reasons: fear of getting caught, maybe. And in this case, we think they took off because they had Laura in the vehicle. They had an unconscious woman in the vehicle and didn't want to confront an officer. So they took off, and we found out that the officer who wrote the incident report for the accident now was looking for the car that caused the accident. 3:30 in the morning, not too far from where the accident occurred, he saw a female, unconscious, lying in front of a doorway on Harrison Avenue. Fortunately, And Laura thinks he only found her. All these events happened.
God was taking over everything.
When we look back on it, for the way this worked out, God crafted it. He directed the officer to find Laura because Laura was completely unconscious. If the officer didn't find her, she probably would have died that night. He saw her. She was in critical condition. She suffered head injuries. He called paramedics from New England Medical Center. They came down. They rushed Laura to the hospital. Her ID was stolen, and being unconscious, there was no communication between Laura and the hospital staff. She went into a coma. She was going through seizures. They had to put a name tag on her bed when they admitted her. And now Laura wasn't Laura Chagnon anymore. She was a Jane Doe. They did everything they could. They put a feeding tube in her stomach, a breathing tube down her throat, and all they could do was try and keep her alive, keep her on life support. And the first week went by, and Laura did not come out of her coma.
No.
Second week comes and goes. Laura's still in her coma.
Yes.
Third and fourth week,
Still in a coma.
Laura realizes God was with her, holding her hand the entire time. The doctors must have been saying to themselves, this woman isn't coming out of her coma. What are we going to do? We can't get her out of her coma. All we can do is wait and see what happens.
Right.
The fifth week, a nurse walks into Laura's room. Laura opened her eyes.
Yes. I was able to give the nurse my home phone number and my name.
And she also said, Mom. So the nurse wrote down Laura's phone number, gave it to her supervisor, called Laura's mother, and said, we have a female here. Looks like she's in her 20s. We don't know her name because she didn't have any identification. Does this mean anything to you? Do you know anyone who's been missing? And of course, Laura's mother said, yes, it must be my daughter. So her mom rushed down to the hospital. And when she got there, they told her, you have to speak to the doctor first before you can talk to your daughter. She saw the doctor, and the doctor told her mother, your daughter is now a legally blind quadriplegic with a traumatic brain injury, and we don't know if any of her cognitive skill will come back because we've done tests with her, what they call the Glasgow scale, and she's not really performing that well on the tests. And our suggestion is that you let us put her in a facility for the rest of her life where people who are trained to take care of individuals with head injuries, individuals who are quadriplegic, let them take care of your daughter for the rest of her life. She'd be too much work for you and your husband. And Laura, what did your mom have to say to the doctor that day?
My mom got very angry, and she said, there's no way we're going to abandon our daughter. When she wakes up, she's coming home, and she's going to live at home.
And what Laura had to do the next 3.5 years, she went to different rehab facilities, speech, occupational, and physical rehab. And they were trying to prepare her as much as they could to come back, although it wasn't going to be a normal life, but to try and prepare her the best that she could in order to finally come home. After 3.5 years, 1992, Laura returned home. She was scared of what each day would bring, what her future would be, because she couldn't work a normal job. She has journals from that time in the early 90s about looking out the window. And when you saw people walking, Laura, what were your thoughts when you could see individuals walking? How did you feel?
I felt very sad and angry because I couldn't walk.
She looked at the people walking and she hated them. And she says, they're walking, I can't do anything. And I'm afraid of what my future will be. And what saved Laura was two things. First, Laura forgave the two men. And Laura said, I've got to put what happened behind me. I don't know why they did it. Maybe they were troubled in their minds, so I have to forgive them. and forget about them
Mhm.
and move forward.
And that's what I did.
And the next thing, in high school, Laura loved to write. Her saving grace from the bullying was going in her bedroom after school and writing poetry. So now Laura thought, well, I'm going to have caregivers to help me through my day. Why don't I dictate to them and they can write my words in a thought book? And then from the thought book, when a poem is complete, they can put it on the computer. Laura started doing that in 1992. Now, 28 years later,
I'm still writing, and I've published 5 books.
and she's written 6,000 poems. So
Amazing.
the way that's really helped Laura, now she no longer thought of herself as a quadriplegic.
Mm,
She thought of herself as a poet.
right.
She submitted her poems into local newspapers, poetry contests, and she was gaining confidence with her writing. And now her goal was to publish a book. She wanted to share her words with the world.
Right.
In 2013, I crossed paths with a gentleman who works for a publishing company. His name is Todd Sivan. And I had bought a book that he co-wrote actually with another individual who's quadriplegic. It turned out Todd had a really soft heart for people with challenges, and he would do anything to help them. We
Right.
realized Todd had a heart of gold.
Mm,
So I told him about Laura, and I said, Todd, is there any way you'd consider publishing a book of her poetry? And he said, well, let's get together for lunch, have her bring about 25 of her poems. So we met him at a Ruby Tuesdays, and we just talked and laughed. He didn't even say a poem, but he wanted to get to know us. It was a Friday afternoon. He says, I have a business trip. I'll read the poems on my flight out and on my flight back. And then when I get into work on Monday, I'll share them with my coworkers and we'll make a decision to let you know if the poems are worthy enough to be published. So that weekend, Laura was like a little 6-year-old kid waiting for Christmas.
mhm.
Monday, she was waiting for that call from Todd to find out if she would finally realize her dream of publishing a book of poetry. And what happened was we didn't get a call that entire week.
Right.
And Laura, each day was,
I was very distraught because this was my dream and it wasn't coming true.
and I told Laura, I said, keep writing. Next week comes, Monday, again, no call from Todd. Tuesday, no call. Wednesday, no call. I said, Laura, don't give up on yourself. And Laura, you've struggled probably as much as anyone in life. If someone was struggling, whatever their situation is, what would you tell them?
I would tell them follow their dream. I had a dream to be a published poet. I had so much adversity. I couldn't see and I couldn't use a pen because my hands were paralyzed.
But Laura still held on to that thin thread of faith. She thought to herself, God saved me for a reason. He's faithful, and I'm going to be faithful to God. I'm not going to give up. The next night, Thursday night, she was working on a poem. Phone rang, and I looked at the caller ID. It was that guy, Todd Sivan. I said, Laura, this is more than a week and a half after he was supposed to call. Does not look very good.
No,
I said, Laura, are you going to want to take the call? And Laura said, yes.
absolutely.
So I answered it. And Todd, who was usually always joking around, was dead serious that night. And he said to me, Tom, how's your day going? Is Laura with you? I'd like to talk to her. So I brought the phone over, I put it up to Laura's ear. And Laura, what did Todd have to say to you that night?
Todd said to me that night, Laura, I really love your poetry and your story is great and we would like to publish you.
So 25 years after Laura's accident, Laura realized her dream and she didn't stop there. After her first book, Never Touched a Pen, a few years later, she published a second book called Accepting the Waltz. Then she published her third book, Moon Dusted Blue. She published her autobiography, which also included about 32 poems, called My Name Is Not Jane Doe. And just recently, she published her fifth book, So Blessed to Be Alive. And Laura isn't stopping. She has a goal. Her goal is to publish 3 books in 2021. She's already starting on her 6th book, which will be called All for His Glory. She gives her life up to God. It's all for Him. Laura does as much as she can do for others. With speaking in prisons, we can't do it now because of the COVID, but she's been doing it for about 6 years. She's spoken to 5,000 inmates. She speaks at a faith-based group home for men who are struggling with their lives, and they treat her incredible because they can see someone whose life was saved by God.
And this is a really special place because they all have God in their heart.
It's called My Father's House. It's run by an ordained pastor who shifted gears some years ago and decided instead of preaching in a church, he wanted to help men who were struggling with their lives. And he has a place, men who are homeless, addicts, gang members, men who are incarcerated. But what they see with Laura, although her struggles were different than theirs, they see someone who struggled with life, then gave it up to God, and Laura can live in peace now.
Right.
And that's what the inmates see in her as well. They look at her, they see someone in a wheelchair, but she's peaceful and she's smiling. And that's the thing they don't have in their lives.
Right. But they're great people. I love them. They're just so very nice to me.
Laura's life was difficult before her accident, and so many positive things have happened after her accident.
Right.
And that's why this isn't a pity party.
It's better now than it was before, honestly.
We love what we're doing. We'll be glad when the situation with the COVID passes and we can
Yes.
go back in the prisons. She's spoken to about 5,000 inmates. Their reaction after hearing her, they're so grateful. One came up to her after a presentation and said he was going to commit suicide that day. But after hearing Laura, she finally gave him hope in his life, where he could see that no matter the situation, it gets better. And he also told Laura that he was going to start going to a Bible study class that they have at the prison.
That was amazing. That's what made my day.
And Laura, who feared that her life would have no value when she came home from her accident, searching for what she could do, when she speaks in prisons or group homes, and the men have a reaction like that she gave them hope, Laura realized God saved her for a reason. Like we said with Genesis 50:20, she's saving so many lives out there now. For someone who doctors said Laura should be living in a facility for the rest of her life, she and God fooled them.
We did. I'm very happy now with everything that I do.
So there's so many positive things in Laura's life now. Every day it seems something new happens, and today we get to speak with you, Liza, and sharing her story is not just sharing Laura's story, it's sharing what God can do for someone whose situation seemed so bleak. Laura was probably minutes away from death. If that officer didn't arrive, there wouldn't be a Laura Chagnon today. And that's why we start off every day.
We start our day with a prayer.
And we're just grateful for another day.
Right.
That's our prayer. We thank him, we praise him for another day.
That's beautiful. Well, I love this story, and I love the work that you're doing. I feel like you're just this living example of God's light and God's love. And I think that's why the men in the prisons, they come to you and share their hearts to let you know that you are making a difference. And I think it's because they really can feel God through you and your work that you're doing. I think that's very, very beautiful. How did you guys meet? I'm curious about that. And when did you guys meet?
It was 2000. one of Laura's caregiver put something online. I had seen that about a poet who's quadriplegic. I always liked words. I like lyrics to songs. And I thought, well, I'll just respond. And we communicated back and forth through emails and then phone calls. And then one night, Laura asked me to come over her house. Laura lives with her parents. And we just talked. I could see the shyness in Laura. I could also see that she had a lot to offer. The depth of her thinking, her poetry is very deep. But then at the end of the night, I could see a little bit of sadness. And she just looked at me and said, look at, I'm a lot of work. The situation I'm in, I'm quadriplegic. Tom, I'm a lot of work.
And Tom said, no, you're not. You are a work of art.
Oh,
And that was the best compliment I could have ever had.
That's
And that
beautiful.
was 2000, and we've been together every day since. I don't see the quadriplegia in Laura. It is what it is. You know, I help Laura 365 days of the year. I should be worn out because I'm with Laura
Yeah.
from 7 o'clock in the morning, except for 2 nights where she has one of her caregivers does the overnight. But all the other nights, I'm putting Laura to bed at 11. I'm going straight through the whole day with her, but I'm not tired. Anything is possible through God, and He gives me the strength to take care of her. I have to admit, I sleep good after 11 o'clock, but we'd start again the next day, 7 o'clock. The next morning, Laura's calling for me, and we just start all over again. And when you love what you're doing, you love the person you're doing it for, it's not work at all. We just look at every day as a new adventure, and we worship God, and we know He's looking over us, He's protecting us, He's taking care of us, and we have no fear of anything at all.
When you have faith, it's extraordinary. I feel like I have arms around me.
And Laura's expressed it before in her poetry, where she doesn't think about what she's lost. She thinks about what she still has. She has a love for nature, a love for her faith. There's so much that she can take in every day. Her favorite birds are what, Laura?
Crows, they're such characters.
Many of her poems are about crows, too.
Yeah.
That's fun. I love that. I love that. Well, I do love your poetry. The one I have open right now is The Writer and the Runner. And I'm sure that's both of you a tribute to your relationship. And I just think it's beautiful that you both take care of each other and you find such joy in each other. And that's evident as I've been watching and listening to your story, how much you do care for one another. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Liza. We really enjoyed it.
Any last words or anything else you'd like to share before we end?
Do you want to recite your poem, Invincible, Laura?
Yes.
I'll help her out if she doesn't remember it. It's what Laura found out about her life, that before her accident, when everything was going well for her in college, at 26, you felt invincible, but you found life can change. So, Laura?
Invincible. I remember when I read into the night. My own hand held a fork to eat and a pen to write. I thought I was invincible. I remember when I was very shy. I needed to escape so I could reach the sky. I thought I was invincible. My wheelchair's in the corner, my PCA a little late. I listen to the birds outside and lay in bed and wait. I know I'm not invincible. Today my sight is damaged. I cannot see to read. I need the help of other hands for everything I need. I know I'm not invincible. This message is for everyone. Please, please be careful what you do. Life's so very precious. A gift God gave to you. Don't think that you're invincible.
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing all the gifts that you're giving to the world right now. I love that you say that your life is better now than it was before. And I think that's because God is working through you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, Liza. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening to this miracle story. free. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. You can also find me on